most people that took the quiz did fine with functions as equations, but struggled a bit with the graphs. So I have an activity here that we'll spend some time practicing all of those things again. And I'm just going to start off with the ones that you guys did pretty well on, and that is just a function in an equation. So I have a function f evaluated at s equals 8s plus 100, represents the cost in dollars of ordering s number of shirts. So this whole thing is representing the cost, and just the s is the number of the shirts. So what does f evaluated at 150 mean? Well, that 150 is replacing the s, and it's really saying what's the cost of 150 shirts. So if I were to evaluate that, I would just plug in 150 times 8 plus 100, and you guys can use a calculator and figure out that answer. The next question says, what does f evaluated at s equals 4,100 mean? Well, in this case, that is representing the entire cost. So basically, this is representing the cost is $4,100 for S shirts. S is always a bad letter to use. It looks like a 5. Or how many shirts could I make for $4,100? And if I were solving this one, I would substitute the 4,100 in for the whole output and solve. It looks like I would subtract 100 and divide by 8. So you guys can do that on your own. So please remember that f evaluated at -3 means -3 is your input and you are plugging it in for x. F of x equals -3 means that your whole function is equal to -3 and you plug it in for the y, or the output. Remember, that could have been written y equals 8s plus 100 as well. All right, so when we are looking at functions as tables, oh my gosh, my papers are giving me a hard time here. We have another little story problem here that the function h evaluated at a represents the average height of a boy that is a years old. So somebody that's 6 months old, right, half of a year, on average has a height or a length of 26 inches. So this first one says, use the table to evaluate h evaluated at a is equal to 51 and explain what this means in context. Well, remember, this number is your input. Your y, or your output, is the height. So age is your input, height is your output. And this is saying your output is 51 inches. What would be the age of a boy who is 51 inches in length? Well, it looks like that answer would be 8 years old. So this means what is the age of a boy who is 51 inches tall? Don't judge my little weird thing on the A there. Now this next one says, use the table to evaluate h at 1.5 and explain what this means in context of the problem. Well, in this case, we are replacing the A with a 1.5. So this is when we have a boy's age of 1.5 years old, or 18 months. And this is really saying is what's the height of a boy 1.5 years old. And the answer in this case is 34 inches. So height at age 1.5. Oh my gosh, did not leave myself space for an equal sign. All right, so that's reading a table. The next thing we're going to do is learn how to read a graph. And again, this function notation, now we're using letters that make sense with the story problem here. This function represents the distance d that Gulliver traveled from home after t hours. So the input is time and the output is distance. So like this is your x-axis and this is your y-axis. That's the same thing, your input and your output. So time is the input. This whole thing is representing the distance as a function of time as the output. So it says use the graph to evaluate d evaluated at 7 and explain the meaning in context to Gulliver's travels. Well, this is saying after 7 hours, so this is replacing time, so we know the time. After 7 hours, what is Gulliver's distance from home? Well, looking on the x-axis, the input, it appears that this point on the graph is when Gulliver is 10, what's the distance, miles from home. So in function notation, we would write the distance after 7 hours equals 10 miles. So all those words that I'm writing out are in this nice symbolism there. So much easier to write. Now this next one says, use the graph to evaluate distance as a function of time equals 4 and explain its meaning in context to Gulliver's travel. Well, in this case, we don't know time, but we do know what the distance is equal. So basically, when is Gulliver 4 miles from home is what this notation is asking. And now in this case, I know he's 4 miles from home. Oh boy, this is a tricky one. And he is 4 miles from home, 2 different places. It looks like he was 4 miles from home between 2 and 3 hours into his journey. So it looks like he must have stopped somewhere and his distance remained constant for that hour. Maybe he took a nap, maybe he was playing video games, who knows. And that is on his way away from home. His distance got further and further and further, but then it looks like he was coming back and his distance was also 4 miles from home. Okay, my line just went a little crooked. I'm going to say at about 8.9 hour mark. He was also 4 miles from home. So that one is tricky. This one we had to look at the output and find all the values for which he was 4 miles from home. Okay, all these other questions you can answer on your own. I wanted to just look at that graph in context of a story problem and answer those questions. If you want to take the time to do those other questions, you certainly may. But then I have another graph, and we're going to talk about all of these because this is what some of your homework might look like. All right, so we have another graph of a function. Now this one's just a made-up function. It doesn't have a story problem that goes with it. And it says, use it to evaluate the following. Well, every single one of these, I know what my input value is. So on my x-axis, and here's my y-axis, x is equal to 1, 2, 3 right here. Well, my graph, when x is 3, it looks like the output, and I'm going to assume we're going by ones, the output is at -2. This one is saying for this function, when the input is 0, what's my output? Well, again, I'm going to assume we're going by ones, and that output is +2. When the input is -2, 1, 2, it looks like my output is at this point. It does have a closed circle, so it does equal that, and that's at -3. And this last one, for the known input, when x is 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, now this is unique. There's an open circle there. This does not have an answer. So when the input is 5, that doesn't have an output, so this is an undefined function at that point. So undefined, no solution, whatever you want to write there would be totally fine. Now these last three look like they are the ones going backwards when it's telling me to find what x is, find what the input is when I know the output is -3. Now I already knew that my output was -3 at when x was -2. So if I look along where the output is -3, that is the only point that touches. So it looks like x would be -2 when this function has an output of -3. So this is basically saying that the y value is -3. This next one looks like it's going to be one of those tricky ones again. Find x for when the output, when the y value equals 0. Well, the y value equals 0, it looks like 1, 2, 3 different spots. And it looks, oh boy, it's not a perfect match there. I'm going to guesstimate, and I'm going to say x is about -8/10. Now you could say whatever you wanted. I don't think I could argue with you. This one looks like it, I'm going to call that one at about 1.5. And here, let's see, not quite 4.5. I'm going to say x is about 4.3. So in this case, the output y equals 0 at 3 different points on this function. And then last but not least, it's asking find x when the output for y is equal to 2. Now this is like our Gulliver's Travel problem. Got a couple interesting things going on here. It looks like on this interval between 0 and 1, my output would be a 2. So I can finish up this video and splice it together in WeVideo. This will be my first attempt. So what I was saying is that every single point on this horizontal line has an output of 2. Like this point is at 1, 2, 1/2, 2, 1/4, 2, 0, 2. Every single point, and that's why I would write that in an interval. Or you could write it in words. Between and including 0 and 1, the output would be a 2. Now it does appear that the output would be 2 here if that were a closed circle, but because that's saying we're not including that point, so the only answers here would be for x values between 0 and 1. Now, as you look at the levels, there's level 2, level 3, and level 4 problems for you to work. You only need to pick 2 of those worksheets, and it could be levels 2 and 3, levels 3 and 4. I would not recommend doing level 2 and 4. And on not on Infinite Campus, on Classroom, it says that level 4 is not graded. I just assumed most people would be picking level 2 and 3. It will be graded if that's the one that you choose. All right, I hope this was helpful, and function notation will not be the best of you. Okay, see you later, bye.